Okay, let's do part 2. Okay, so part 2 of Le Corbusier's career introduces the kind of moment where his more complex ideas are forming. So this image is from 1914, and this project is from 1914, and he was working for Barons with Gropius and Mies in 1910. So 4 years later, these ideas that were kind of congealing in his head have now produced this conceptual idea. So this image, known as the Domino House, this is a play on the words domus and then domino, like the little toy. The Domino House is a concept which is saying here, within the system, Le Corbusier separated structure from enclosure. The results were the free plan with its flexible distribution of walls and the free facade, which could take on any desired configuration. This is often referenced as kind of the very beginning of the 5 points of architecture developing. So within this project, he chooses to draw and to show the concept of the house in this way. And this is not a building. It doesn't have any sort of skin or envelope or enclosure. It's just 3 floor slabs, columns on a grid, a foundation, and stairs. And that's it. And the stairs don't just go to the middle level here. That would be maybe the 2nd floor. They go all the way up to the top, which is the 3rd floor, which could indicate roof garden. This could indicate a roof terrace or utilizing that upper space. Even though there's no columns up there, indication that this continues. The free plan, as it says, is indicated by the fact that there's no placement of walls. There are no walls, no exterior or interior walls, which shows that they can go anywhere independent of the column structural grid. And then the free facade, which we know there's no facade here, so it could be anything. It could be glass. It could be any material or ornamentation or detail. So the concepts within the Maison Domino are referenced in the future. But one thing that is interesting about this is it's designed, the concept of the Domino House, it's designed as one of a series of many units or many objects that are going to work together in kind of an urban plan or a site plan way. So when we look at the utilization of this as he intended, this is kind of the best image I could find. This is from the Le Corbusier Foundation. But you can understand here how each of the little units that he was looking at, so the 6 columns in this plan, if you can just bear through the pixelation, the 6 columns in the plan relate to the 6 columns shown in this drawing. So you can see 1, 2, 3 at the back, 1, 2, 3 at the front. That set of 6 columns is represented in plan like this little character, which is the domino effect that he's talking about. And when you stack or merge or connect these different little modular units, they turn into a bigger space. So you could merge a couple of them together. You could treat each one as its own little dwelling space. But this becomes a flexible construction methodology that then can be skinned or treated however you would like to create an exterior frame. So the idea of this is it's democratic, it's meant to be flexible, it's meant to be cheaply constructed, and as a housing solution for the masses. This isn't a single-family luxury home. This is an idea about how to utilize materials efficiently and create housing for the middle class. So the Maison Domino never manifests into a project. It's just an idea that he has in 1924, and he publishes, or he exhibits it in a group exhibit, I should say, which he's invited to because of his connections with the Bauhaus School. So here's a quote here about how he's thinking about housing. He's really kind of perplexed or obsessed with housing at the early point in his career, and he says, if we eliminate from our hearts and minds all dead concepts in regard to houses and look at the question from a critical and objective point of view, we shall arrive at the house machine, the mass production house, healthy and morally so too, and beautiful in the same way that the working tools and instruments which accompany our existence are beautiful. He published this in 1923 and Towards a New Architecture, which we'll get to in a minute. But this is a summary of how he thinks about housing. So it's a machine. He says the house machine It is mass produced. It can be mass produced, but in his mind, ideally, it's mass produced. It's healthy, not just physically, but morally. And it's beautiful in the same way that the working tools and instruments are beautiful. So it's not beautiful in the way that Villa Fallet is beautiful, or in terms of intricate detail, fine craftsmanship, these types of things that were associated with beauty maybe in the Victorian era. But it's beautiful according to a machine aesthetic, or an aesthetic of the working tools and instruments. And this to him means cars, boats, grain elevators, anything that's kind of an efficient or industrial type of structure or materiality he deems beautiful, and the home should be reflective of that type of style. Okay, so that moment where he creates that publication is while he's still living in Switzerland. He's in a group show abroad, and then he comes home. And this is the last project that he creates in his hometown, and I actually think it's kind of the most interesting and definitively the weirdest. This is known as Villa Schwab for the clients, Villa Schwab. But Villa Schwab is sort of unlike any other piece of architecture that I know of. It has a series of heavy, massive volumes, so you can see this kind of volumetric massing in terms of how the composition exists. There are elements of this that I would say you could argue have a relationship with his future career, particularly the pilotis, which I assume you learned about in the Villa Savoie conversation. But these skinny columns that the whole upper volume is resting on has a relationship to what will be in his future, but the pilotis here look incredibly out of place, and maybe purposefully so. I don't know. The big blank facade here that really looks like it should be kind of an advertising for a theater, or maybe the whole thing is a theater. It doesn't look like a home to me. It really looks like a commercial structure. And the big blank facade looks like it's meant for something, meant for some sort of advertising or text, but it's not. And I think the framing around it, these types of details, framing the way he's dividing this volume, emphasizes that. It emphasizes the fact that this is just one big open square, and he's going to frame that for you to notice. These tiny little oval windows that are going to frame this are purposeful, and they're in contrast to some of these bigger windows in the rounded volumes. The cornice detail on these rounded volumes is like very pronounced, and I think particularly bizarre given his interest in kind of what he's done previously. So the Villa Schwab is studied as almost kind of a Frankenstein moment of some of the earlier goals or ideals of his maybe more conservative early career versus his future. And I don't know, I find this project humbling in a way where you can look at this and see like, whoa, it's not all worked out. He didn't quite have it all figured out, but to some degree, we can see the struggle, and we can appreciate, I think, where it goes and the pieces of this that do filter into his future work. And as a precedent, this one's fun to study. I would keep that in mind for your future. Okay. So he gets out of town. He leaves the hometown finally. He really decides he's going to take this kind of career that he's building, move to Paris, and start an office with his cousin, Pierre Jeanneret. So he's Charles Jeanneret. His cousin is Pierre Jeanneret. Pierre does not ever change his name, but at this moment, LeCorbusier becomes LeCorbusier. So as he flies the nest, moves to Paris, starts his own office, he changes his name here and kind of reinvents himself or self-brands as LeCorbusier. And he creates this magazine. So the magazine is one of the early examples of, or clear examples of, his understanding of publishing and his understanding of self-promotion. So he creates this magazine, which he is the editor of, Le Spirit Nouveau. So it's the New Spirit magazine. It's about design. It is about architecture and the kind of new wave of thinking or of design that's happening. This is the first cover. This is number 1, which you can see here. But even the graphics, I'd say, are pretty contemporary. On purpose, he's looking at using this type of non-ornamented or sans serif language to communicate the ideas that are evolving here. So Le Spirit Nouveau is his first foray into publication, And with it, we see some of his own ideas published inside this magazine. And this is one of the ones that he references. He creates this before the magazine, but in 1922, he creates this idea that reinforces or investigates the idea of the machine, the house as a machine for living. He names it the Citron House, which is labeled right here. The Citron House is a play on the French car company Citroën, which is spelled right here. He changes the name a little bit, he changes the words, but this reinforces his idea of a machine. And I think at this point, the argument could be made that this becomes somewhat superficial to talk about the house as a machine and then literally name the house after a car company. Seems like a very one-to-one investigation of how is the house a machine. And I think there could easily be an argument made at this time that Frank Lloyd Wright is literally making more headway into having technological advancements inside a home. The aesthetic of Frank Lloyd Wright's work, though, would not indicate that. So you can see a little bit of, I don't know, allegiance to something based on aesthetic and based on kind of superficial conjunction with machines instead of actually kind of function or true relationship with machines. So I think you could parallel their careers. But Le Corbusier claims this relationship with the machine, and this home then begins to display, I think, some of the future tenets of his work, which include large blank facades here. So this is meant to be a suggestion of the fact that this could be used, or this structure could be used in tandem. You can see that this unit is actually the exact same configuration as this unit in the background. They're just a mirrored, reversed view of the same unit. And this actually is a very clever device because it shows us, here we see kind of two facades of the cube, and then here we see the other two facades. So it actually fills in the blank of all the missing pieces of information on the other two sides of this particular drawing. So here you can see the ribbon window emerging in this maybe front facade. It looks like almost we're looking at the back here, but I hesitate to say because I don't know what's front or back. And then the reinforcement of the roof plan here, which the roof is now the garden or the terrace. And then this outdoor space with these tall little pilotis that are kind of holding up the shade structure here. So it's asymmetrical. There are moments of these small funny windows which have carried over now from, I would say, Villa Schwab. And the door frame is almost an exact copy of what exists at Walter Gropius's shoe factory. So if you look at the door at the shoe factory, it's the same door. So you can, this one's fun to pick apart for that reason. There are a couple different relationships here. And maybe these small windows are existing, just these two on this facade, as a kind of hesitant way of suggesting that maybe there would be windows connecting these two things. Here there are a couple other small ones that maybe would still exist if these things were connected. Okay. So then a year later here, he actually publishes Towards a New Architecture. And it's translated as Towards a New Architecture in English, but in French here, it's really just Towards an Architecture. And the book, the cover doesn't lie. The book is almost a picture book, for lack of a better term or description, but it uses imagery in a very purposeful way as a set of comparisons. And this comes from the magazine. You can see here, collection from L'Esprit Nouveau. He's compiling all these things into a book that can be actually published. Very smart, a very smart way to gain a publication. This book is widely agreed to be the most important architecture book of the 20th century. Number one, hands down, without a doubt, widely agreed to be the very most important book about architecture in the 20th century. So its importance is crucial. And what's on the cover here but a steamship? So this is the next to the hull of a boat, where you can see this aesthetic, the idea of view, mirroring relationships, repetition, symmetry even involved in this framing of the image. But the pictures that he chooses and uses are very purposeful. So it reads as a series of comparative images, and the text is then comparative text talking about progress. And I've mentioned to you guys before that the idea of modernism is synonymous in some ways with the idea of progress. Modernism is a naive movement that really truly believes that with architecture or through the use of architecture, we can change the quality of life of the inhabitants. And I say it's naive because in many different ways, the experiments of modernism have proved false. So many of the structures that were built or the communities in an urban planning scale that were built did not have the effect or impact that they wanted. So that's why I call it naive. But this book is instrumental in setting up that fact that progress is good, that progression of technology is important to this movement. Okay, so a couple plates from the book here that clearly indicate this. You can see the Paestum temple here versus the Parthenon. So one's meant to be the worst version before, and one's meant to be the evolved version afterwards. You can see he's doing this with the car also from 1907 to 1921. So, I mean, actually now they look very similar to me, given that they're both just old cars. But you can tell that this one is definitely less streamlined. This one's much more streamlined and kind of looks more elegant. In the text here, he's saying when once a standard is established, competition comes at once and violently into play. It is a fight. In order to win, you must do better than your rival in every minute point, in the run of the whole thing, and in all the details. Thus, we get the study of minute points pushed to limits. Progress. A standard is necessary for order in human effort. So it's about establishing and comparing yourself to kind of the last moment of standards. And art history and architectural history is taught with this type of mindset that we look at. I mean, he's not referencing this by accident. We look at older buildings and we look at, okay, that was one development, and then the next version of that improved upon X, Y, and Z, and that's how we can say that progress is happening or things are evolving. So he is implying through the use of all these other disciplines and pieces of evidence that his architecture symbolizes progress, and that he is this kind of best, newest competition winner, essentially, in the whole thing and in the details, and that his work is now setting the new standard for human effort in architecture. It's a pretty amazing argument to make. I mean, it's definitely an egotistical argument to make, but he is so prolific throughout his lifetime, and even at this age, I mean, in 1923, he's like, what, 30? 28? He's made a lot of progress, so, you know, it's okay to say this for him. But the book then references and looks at mass and at surface, and he does this with North American industrial forms. He loves industrial forms that are used for efficient means, and they're built this way because this is how they function, not because this is architecture with a capital A. This is vernacular design that is engineered more than it's designed. And he's talking here about mass and surface. He says mass and surface are the elements by which architecture manifests itself. Everything is determined by the plan. The plan is the generator. So much the worse for those who lack imagination. I think that's funny. So, form is determined by the plan, which I think hints at his love for and fundamental appreciation for interior space. And Le Corbusier is a master of interior space. I'm sure you learned this with Villa Savoie, but we'll look at that in a little bit. His respect for and understanding of how to create an organized plan that then manifests itself three-dimensionally with mass and surface is masterful. And this is one of the things, the reasons why you study him and the reasons why we look at his work so closely. Okay. So Villa Stein is the first place that he puts into practice the 5 points of architecture. And Villa Stein is really very well documented and kind of beloved by historians because it's a good example now of all of the ideas coming together, and it's a little bit more massive, and there's somewhat more of a structural grid to deal with on more levels than Villa Savoie, so we can see some more of these efforts coming to life here. So in the image we're looking at, this is one of the images Le Corbusier himself liked as a, I guess, promotional or marketing image of the home. Now it's like you would have a photo shoot of a project when it was over. That's what this is the equivalent of. And he likes this because what's in the foreground but a car. So the automobile is hugely important to his understanding of the home and understanding of the home as a machine. And it's no accident that as you look straight down this image, down the driveway for the car, there are built-in garages into the home. Now this doesn't surprise us, but in 1927 this was a very different, shocking, new idea. And then the home itself doesn't necessarily look like it shares a scale, a proportion, or a language with residential architecture. So he's purposefully trying to do this and separate this from residential architecture at the time. So in the plan, these are interesting drawings, and this is an interesting plan because he really embraces the curve, and you see this in Savoie too, but he embraces the curve as a representation of the freedom that the walls have on the interior. So the column grid and the structural grid of the project does not have to determine what the walls do, and the curve suggests that. I think this moment right here in the staircase that kind of repeats over and over again, where the stair curves here, but the columns stay right in their row, points out the fact that yes, you could have had a rounded staircase that then hid the columns, but then you wouldn't highlight the kind of point of the architecture, the point of the free plan. So within this, there is a large, you can see it here on the first floor, there's a large courtyard space. It's kind of bound within the confines or the volume of this space. It's connected to this kind of terrace area that steps down to the outside. So this outside area becomes negative space within the whole volumetric of the house. This is that negative space. I'm talking about the terrace area that then connects down to the stairs. And this image shows us too, so he's talked about the free plan, the roof garden that exists here. You can see it's kind of a half level, which we saw in the Citron House also, and the ribbon windows and the free facade. So the facade can kind of do anything it wants. It can even move past the interior space. It's just a facade. It's not the structural means of the home. So all of these ideas are present here. And just some interior images to show how this space works. I think these images are remarkable because even for 2016, these images do not look like a residential home. They just don't look like the scale or the language of a residential home. And it's not that we don't have modern homes now, but the scale somehow feels very commercial or almost feels like an office building more than it feels like a home. I think this is kind of a masterful feat that he has created. Okay, so our 5 points of architecture are pilotis, roof garden, free plan, ribbon windows, and free facade. That should say number 5, not number 4 twice. Pilotis symbolize the freedom of the structure, is not tied into the walls or the plan. The roof garden takes away this kind of old gabled roof and gives a reason for a flat roof. This is smart of him because we know aesthetically for years he has favored the flat roof, and even the gabled roofs that he's created, he's kind of wanted to minimize the view of that. So the roof garden is an automatic kind of inviolable excuse for always needing a flat roof, which is a brilliant thing to do. If there's a formal thing that you want and you need a reason for it, well, come up with a reason, and then the formal will not be in question. So here he's got this roof garden to always necessitate the plants growing flat because you can't stand on a gable like this or grow plants. Okay, the free plan again is revolving independently of the structural grid and eliminates the need for the walls, and very similar to the first one. The ribbon windows. The ribbon windows here to him are shown in contrast with these types of punch windows that would have existed before and really only shown you a very specific view one at a time. He is interested in connecting the house with the horizon and having an expansive horizontal view that you don't take away from the person living in here. He wants to emphasize that relationship with the land and with nature, which is also part of his argument for the roof garden. Any land you're taking away by building a structure, you're giving back by giving a roof garden to the top. So connection with environment. And then the free facade, again, he's showing it here with the windows, but the facade can do anything it wants, doesn't have to be bound by what the structure dictates. Okay, let's end this video. In the next one, we'll pick up with savoir.